Topic 2 today. One more time, just for the video. Here's our 5 goals for the day. They're written on the board. Number 1, we're going to talk about alleles. Okay, a very, very technical word for stuff that's inside your genes. And we're going to talk about how, how alleles give you your genetic characteristics. Okay. We're also going to talk about 2 different types of genes, known as your dominant and recessive ones. We're going to, throughout the course of the whole lesson, use a ton of vocabulary. You guys can see the words here: fertilization, sperm, egg, etc. And then we'll talk about 2 different terms that go in matching pairs: meiosis, mitosis, and sexual and asexual reproduction. Okay. So let's read the first paragraph here. The ability to reproduce was one of those fundamental things that if something is going to be alive, it has to be able to have kids. Does that make sense? And I don't care whether we're talking humans or dogs or plants, but you need to be able to make a future generation, right? Without the production of a next generation, well, ... you'd die out, right? Over time, if trees couldn't reproduce through making new seeds and slowly new seedlings grow up through the ground, eventually we'd have no trees on Earth, right? If humans all of a sudden couldn't reproduce, this would be the last generation of people ever. And, about 100 years from now, there'd be no one left, right? So you need to have that next generation. The main focal point of our unit is genetics, which is all about the root word genes. We're going to talk about genes, and maybe another word is heredity. Basically, heredity is all about how you pass those genes to your offspring, right? So when you have kids, often people look like their parents because, well, you came from them, right? You have parts of their DNA. Ooh, I forgot. I have a little YouTube video I need to show you. Should have loaded that up. Bear with me. Let's see if I can find that one real quick. Genetics 101. Where's the video? Here it is. Is the sound on? Perfect. Okay, so I got a quick fun little video here. It's corny, okay, just so you're aware. It's corny, but it's going to talk about the basics of where you came from.
Is made up of 50 trillion cells. Cells come in many different varieties with many different functions. But inside almost every cell is a nucleus containing 99.9% of your genes, and mitochondria containing a few more genes. All told, you have nearly 20,000 genes. Proteins are small parts of a long molecule called DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid. If you lined up all of the DNA containing all of your genes, it would measure 6 feet long. But it's coiled so tightly that it fits in just one cell nucleus. DNA is a double-stranded molecule composed of sugar, phosphate, and 4 different bases: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. These bases spell out the language known as the genetic code. The number and order of these 4 bases determine, for example, whether you are a chimp, a cow, a banana, or a human. Most genes are recipes for making specific proteins. These recipes are passed down from parents to children, from generation to generation. When someone says, "You have your father's hair," what they mean is, you appear to have inherited a gene or genes from your father that makes a protein that instructs your hair follicle cells to produce hair that curls like your father's. But they usually opt for the shorter version. Genes tell a cell how to function and what traits to express. More specifically, gene regulators turn Monkeys had 21 pairs of chromosomes. Cows had 30 pairs of chromosomes. Chickens had 29 pairs. Fruit flies had 4 pairs. And bananas had 11 pairs. So, what percentage of the DNA in your chromosomes do you share with other species? You share 93% of your DNA with the rhesus monkey and 98.5% with our friend chimpanzee. How about with other humans? 99.5%. So, what makes us different from one another? Well, for one thing, SNPs.
Video kind of ends. It's supposed to go on to another one. I want to just rewind to like a few key points here. I want to talk about, let's say, this one right here. This is where we kind of want to begin here. I don't need you to like put your hand up or say anything out loud, but like, do you have the same hair color as your parents, as one of your parents, or you have the same eye color as your parents? That's very common. However, we're going to talk today about in genes how sometimes there are recessive genes that are hidden. A great example that I use is in my family. I have brown hair. My wife has brown hair. 2 of my kids have brown hair, and then when we had our 3rd daughter, she came out with red hair, and we were like, what? Because we didn't expect that, right? And we then discovered that both Melissa and I must have a recessive redhead gene in our DNA that we weren't aware of, right? But in general, there are often very large similarities between parents and kids, right? Even just look at the picture they put right here. You know, skin tone is the same. The hair between this one and this one's the same. I know this one's now white and balding, but like the curly hair. Look at the eyebrows. The eyebrows are similar. Now, granted, not every characteristic you have is going to be the same as your parents, but that's where you inherit it from. Now, I want to talk about this picture right here for a second. I think this one's kind of ridiculous, but it kind of points something out, is that all of your body, all of the cells in your body have your entire DNA coding inside of it, telling it what to do. Your eyes, though, are only supposed to do eye things. And so most of your cells have been told to like turn off the other sets of DNA. Because otherwise it would be really weird if all of a sudden like bone cells decided to start reproducing feet. You kind of get where I'm going with that there? Like every single cell in your body has the entire code of DNA, but most of it's turned off. Your eye cells have been told to only do eye processes. So all the information about what your feet are supposed to be like, that's turned off, right? And I think that's kind of important to recognize because of this last bit right here. We know that much of our DNA is actually similar between other species as well as ourselves, but that makes sense. Why would 99.5 of my DNA be the same as yours? Well, I have a head, so do you. I have feet, so do you. Now, you might have a different like earlobe attachment than me, but in general, very basic structures we share the same. In fact, when you want to compare between like say a monkey or a chimpanzee, they share very similar structures. They have a heart. They have lungs. Does that make sense? Now, they might have slightly different adaptations, but that's why most of the code for the DNA is fairly similar. But it's that 1%, or in this case right here, it's that 0.5% that really makes you, right? I mean, this is kind of a corny lesson here, but like this is what makes you so special that there's no one else like you in the world. Okay. I'm going to go back to my notes here. I love this picture right here. I found this one online. I'm not sure if it's true, but I'm sure you've probably seen pictures like this. This is the mom 30 years ago, and then this is their daughter with the most recent picture, right? And they look like identical. I have the same thing with some of our baby photos of me, my wife, and our kids. When we take a picture of like my daughter, say Cameron, and then I take a baby photo of my wife, Melissa, like they look identical to each other. And that's why, is that genetic material is passed down from parents, right? All of those genes that tell your body you need 2 eyes, and those genes that tell your body you need an ear over here, and that gene that tells your body you need to have a foot, right? Well, all that information came from your parents, therefore you're very, very similar. But it's also one of the reasons why there's many medical conditions that are inherited. Right? Maybe you've heard of some of these. Cystic fibrosis, Huntington's, sickle cell anemia. These are all genetic diseases that are detrimental. Yeah. Yeah, that's another one that can be passed on, right? Where sometimes there's negative medical conditions, right? Sometimes there's positive ones as well. For example, there's getting to be a lot of research discovering that there seems to be more athletic genes in people. A really good example to use right now would be LeBron James. His firstborn son is now becoming a highly recruited basketball player. And I'm sure part of it's because his dad is, famous and rich and there's opportunities there, right? But there are many professional athletes now that are like the second generation, right? Where their dad played in the NHL and now they play in the NHL. Now, to what degree is that because of wealth and money and opportunity? And to what degree is that because genetically you pass down the ability to shoot a hockey puck really well? Right? So, that being said, although you're going to be similar to your parents, there is still variation. And one of the reasons why there's variation is that you need two parents. If you could be born by just one parent, you'd be identical to them. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. That's known as asexual reproduction, and that's where all of your genetic material comes from the same source. You'd essentially be a clone, but because you get half your information from mom and half from dad, then there are slight differences. Yeah. Okay, and then had offspring. So even identical twins, though, there's still some genetic variation, even in identical twin DNA. One of the challenges, though, is being able to find it. DNA is so. Do you remember that one video in there? They talked about how DNA would stretch about 6 meters or 6 feet wide, but it's coiled up so small that it fits within one cell. If you were to look at all of the DNA sequencing, even identical twins, they actually have some differences between their DNA, but usually it's hard to spot. Does that make sense? So to answer your question, they still would have uniquely different children, I guess. Yeah, but chances are they would look very similar. Great question. Okay, let's talk about the technical terms here. You need to know some of the stuff inside your body. The first word I need you to know, you probably already have heard of, is called a cell, right? All living things are made up of cells, right? That's the basic, the Lego blocks that construct you, if you want to use an analogy, right? You're made of stuff. Those blocks are cells, and inside the cell is called the nucleus. And inside that nucleus is something called DNA, and the fancy word for it is deoxyribonucleic acid. I didn't need to do the R though, didn't I? Sorry. Deoxy, that's the D. Nucleic, that's the N, and acid is A. So that's DNA. And it's blueprints, right? They had the picture of the person just literally typing away. Jacqueline, could you close the door for me? Thanks. They had the person typing away on the typewriter. There are literally only 4 types of bases found inside your DNA, and it makes a code. Has anybody ever heard of binary code? Binary code is basically ones and zeros. So you go 1 0 0 1 1 0 1 1 1 0 0 1 0 0 1 0 1, right? And that makes a code. Well, your body is basically made up of a code, but with 4 numbers: A, T, G, and C, right? And as your body has that code in different repetitions, even in identical twins, when you have like 20,000 sequences of genes, there will be at least something that's different. Okay. Well, that DNA is found inside chromosomes, and we have a certain number of chromosomes. We have 46. And they always come in pairs. I'm sure it's on another slide here. Do I have the picture of the pairs? Okay, I don't have the picture of it on this set aside coming up next, but we get 46 chromosomes, but that's because 23 come from your genetic mom, and 23 come from your genetic dad, and collectively 23 and 23 makes 46. Question? Oh, you're just stretching. Okay. Here's another picture that kind of illustrates, if you could, you guys ever watch the Magic School Bus? I love Magic School Bus. If you could go on the Magic School Bus, zip down to tiny size, this would be like the journey you'd go through. Here's a cell. Inside the cell is a nucleus. Inside the nucleus is this chromosome. But there are many chromosomes inside your body. Again, how many chromosomes are there? 46. But 23 pairs. They always come in pairs because one comes from mom, one comes from dad. And we're going to talk about in a second here how, depending on which one of those chromosomes is dominant, decides what gene takes hold. because your mom gives you genetic information, so does your dad, and one of them is kind of a winner sometimes as to which one says what's going to happen in you. Now, breaking that down though, inside of those chromosomes are very specific genes. Genes for hair color, genes for eye color, genes for how long your left shin bone is going to be, right? All of that coding is hidden inside these genes, and it's really a repetitive pattern of C, T, G, and A. Do I have that written down on a slide? Here it is, yeah. Those patterns are adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. Okay? Those are basically the 4 codes that make up your genetics. Okay? And it always has to be an even number. You know how we talked about how humans have 46? But in that YouTube video, cows had 30 and bananas had something else? Yeah, but it was 11 pairs, right? I guarantee you that if you're getting a pair, because half from mom, half from dad, even if it was an odd number, like 11, when you put them together, it becomes 22, right? So it is an absolute guarantee that if you or an object or an offspring is made up sexually, we'll talk about asexual later, but sexually from mom and dad's reproduction, it has to be an even number because half come from each. So, make sense so far? Okay, so let's talk about our first discussion topic for the things to understand. I need you to know this word here. It's called an allele. Okay, an allele is the word. And I'll just read off the slide here. We now hopefully understand. You probably knew this already, right? I don't know that much of this was brand new to you. You probably knew the basics. We know that genes are responsible for inheriting your characteristics. And a gene, then, is a whole bunch of DNA. And it gives characteristics through what we call an allele. Okay? Your body has an allele that will tell you what color hair to have. Your body will have an allele that will tell you what sort of earlobe you have. And I have a whole bunch of different pictures of some really common ones here that maybe you do or don't have. For example, a cleft chin. There's some people who have like that little mark right in the middle of their chin. That's a genetically inherited thing, and some people don't. There is an allele for that, which is either you do or you don't. Right? You could have dimples or not having dimples. There is an allele for that. There's an allele for brown versus blue eyes, or how your earlobe attaches. Right? Does that make sense so far? So I'll read here. Although everybody has the gene for hair, right? I'm looking around the room here. Everybody here has hair. Does that make sense? That's part of the 99% of our bodies that's the same as each other. All of us have genes that say make hair. Sound good? But I have the allele that says brown hair, whereas someone else has the allele that says red hair, and someone else has the allele that says black hair. Does that make sense? So the gene, make hair. The allele says make some variation so that there's some different colors. Do you guys feel like you get that concept there? Okay. Gene is a little bit more broad. You also have a gene that says that you need to have fingers, right? There are alleles then. There are some genetic conditions where some people have 6 fingers on their hand. Anyone ever heard of that before? Right? So that would be some sort of abnormality in the allele that somehow gives someone an extra finger. But the gene, we all share that gene that says have fingers. Now, because of the fact that you have 2 sets of genes, one from each parent, maybe you've heard this vocabulary anymore, but there's always a dominant and a recessive gene. A dominant gene is one that like takes over. So for example, if mom gives you a gene for a cleft chin, and dad gives you a gene for no cleft chin, if the cleft chin gene is dominant, then it happens. Okay? So sometimes you can have a dominant one or a recessive one, and maybe the best way of showing you that is in this picture right here. Okay. When it comes to eye color, brown eyes are dominant, blue eyes are recessive. Okay. And these are little diagrams that help to illustrate where your eye color could come from. Okay. As an example, this could be mom right here, and this could be dad right here. And the way that mom and dad work is they both have brown eyes. Now, the reason why they both have brown eyes is that the genes that they have came from their parents, your grandparents, right? So if you can kind of envision this, these are mom's genes right here. She has 2 sets of genes for eye color. She has a brown allele and a blue allele. Brown could have come from grandma, blue could have come from grandpa. Do you see how, like, your parents, they had to get their genes from their parents, right? So mom has actually two sets of DNA in her. Well, the dominant allele is brown. And so if mom had a brown allele and a blue allele, brown is dominant, so therefore mom has brown eyes. Dad could have the same thing. Your dad has two sets of DNA as well, one from grandma, one from grandpa, right? And so let's say that grandma gave him a blue-eyed allele. Let's say that grandpa gave a brown-eyed allele. Well, brown is dominant, so brown takes over, so dad has brown eyes. Now, when mom and dad create their kid, like say you, there are four possibilities. This gene could mix with this one, and you could have brown with brown. Well, that means you for sure have brown eyes. This blue one could come from dad, and this brown one with mom, and it could give brown blue. But since brown is dominant, you have brown eyes. But this can happen once in a while, where mom has brown eyes, dad has brown eyes, and their kid can have blue eyes. And that's exactly what happened with my wife and I with our daughter. I have brown hair. Melissa has brown hair. But her daughter has red hair. Brown hair must be a dominant trait, and there was a recessive red-haired trait that came from my grandma or my great-grandma that was hidden in my DNA, but because the dominant one takes over, that's what we see. Did you still have a question, by the way? Right. So that would be this example right here then, hey? So this is someone with blue eyes. Someone with blue eyes would then have to have two recessive blue-eyed genes, because if one of them was a capital B for brown, then they'd have brown eyes. And then a brown-blue combo could make these possible combinations here. We're going to spend more time on this tomorrow, by the way. If you're feeling like, whoa, Chris, you just lost me with this picture, that's okay. That's not actually my goal for today. Today, we just want to talk about genetics. Tomorrow, we'll talk more about how you inherit your genetics more in detail. But if this kind of makes sense, I want you to get the terminology. Right here, we are talking about the genes for eyes. Everybody here has eyes, right? Okay, we all share the same genes for eyes, except for little variations. Those variations are called alleles, and the alleles can be either, like, say, blue or brown. Now, there are other colors as well, obviously, too, right? But to simplify things, we're going to keep them very like one or the other. Now, more terms we want to know then is that when species are reproducing, if we're talking about sexual reproduction, right, that involves basically, like I always kind of, lightly kind of say, when a mommy and a daddy love each other very much, but hopefully you guys get where I'm going with this without having to go into too gross of a detail. Males have sperm, and females have an egg or an ova, and when they combine together, then that's how an offspring is born. But we need to use the right terminology, okay? So sperm is the male reproductive system. I don't know. Eggs and ova are from the female. And when they meet up together, the word we use is we call fertilization. Okay, that's the scientific word that we would use, is fertilization. Okay. Now, in terms of other words, when the first cell of a new species, not a new species, a new organism is being formed, we have a name for that. That very first cell is called a zygote. So, right, when the 23 chromosomes come from mom, and when 23 chromosomes come from dad and reform 46, the first name we give that one cell is called the zygote. And that is known as sexual reproduction. However, are you still one cell? No, you're now made of many cells. One cell becomes two, and two becomes four, and four becomes eight, and eventually you're hundreds of cells, and millions of cells, and thousands of cells, right? And so over time, you're no longer undergoing sexual reproduction anymore. Now you're undergoing what we would call cell division, and your cell is making more identical copies. Every cell will be an identical copy for the first little while, because they haven't chosen what type of cell to be yet. Eventually, a cell will say, okay, now I'm a heart cell. And this one will say, now I'm a brain cell, and I'm going to be part of a foot. But for the first little while, all you're doing is you're just multiplying these cells out, and we call that an embryo. So an embryo is basically the baby that's forming in the womb, right? And that collection of cells, which becomes 2, and then 4, and then 8, is the embryo. There's a lot of terminology on this slide. Okay, the word we use to describe how the individual makes more cells is called cleavage. Literally, it's like cleaving. Cleaving means to like cut in half, and then it divides and it makes more of itself. It replicates. You, were cloning yourself when you were 1 and 2 cells big. 1 cell's cloned to become 2. 2 cells cloned to become 4. See how that works? The other word I haven't discussed on this slide is this one right here. There's 2 different pronunciations for it. You can call it a gametes or a gametes. I'm not really sure that either one really is more important than the other in terms of how you say it. Gametes, gametes. Gametes are basically these 2 cells. Gametes are very special cells that are used only for sexual reproduction. Okay. Sex ed talk. Sometimes. If I were to have my skin cells touch with my wife's skin cells, we don't get pregnant. Does that make sense? Right? It's only very special cells that have to combine in order to cause new life to be formed. And so those types of cells are called the gamete cells. And there's only one type that fit, right? It has to be a sperm with an egg. If a sperm cell touches a skin cell, nothing happens. If an egg cell were to touch a heart cell for some reason, nothing would happen, right? Does that make sense? Yeah, that would be strange, obviously, right? So hopefully you get what I'm going for here, though, is that the name we give to these very special type of cells is gametes. So for anyone who's answering the third question here on our things to understand, quick recap then. Fertilization is when 2 cells come together with the purpose of making offspring. Right? Sperm, well, that's what dad gives. Egg, that's what mom gives. We call those gametes because those are the very special cells that can actually undergo sexual reproduction. Zygote is what happens when 2 cells with 23 chromosomes meet up. And an embryo is what happens when it starts to grow. Make sense? Okay. Now, we can talk about animals. We can also talk about plants. Plants actually do the exact same thing. Plants undergo sexual reproduction, which sounds kind of strange to students because if you're in grade 9 and 10 and you've had the sex ed talks and stuff before, you're like, plants don't have sex, Chris. No, not in that sort of way. Is that a question, Ann? Yeah, give me 1 sec here. But plants still do undergo a process that's very much similar. Yeah, what's up, bud? In the human body? To make more? Okay, so that's a little bit deeper question. In males, the human body, you have testicles, and the testicles basically have genes that allow you to create more and more sperm in the same way that your body creates more and more blood and more saliva. Right? Females, however, are born with a certain number of eggs in their ovaries, and that's how many they have. Right? It's something that you're born with. That works? Cool. Okay, let's talk about plants here. Plants do undergo a very, very similar process, and we still use the words male and female. It's different parts of the plant. Okay? Pollen is the male gametes. So in the same way that human males produce sperm, you guys know pollen in the air in the springtime? Like, it gives me horrible allergies, the pollen in the air. But that's actually like the male reproductive stuff. Yeah. The female gametes are found in what's called the pistil, and they're called ovules. And like, here's a good picture, basically, of a plant. Right here, where's my picture here? Here's stamen. Stamen right here would be maybe these parts of the plant right here that are going to release off like little bits into the air, especially when it's windy in Lethbridge. Whereas this part right here called the pistil, it's the spot on the plant. Can you guys? Thanks. This is the spot on the plant where eventually this is going to travel to here, and then that creates the new seeds you need in order to reproduce a plant. Only we give it a different name. We call it pollination. Pollination is how plants reproduce. And usually it's because you have the male and female versions of the same concept, just in plant format. Okay? There are some plants that actually don't have both male and female parts to them. Right? Some plants will actually have both the male organ and the female organ on the same plant, and all it takes is basically moving of the pollen from here to here, and all of a sudden now you have fertilization happening. Only we don't call it fertilization, we call it pollination. That's all. Here's a picture that kind of shows you how pollination can occur. One of the ways is self-pollination. A plant, if it has both male and female reproductive parts for a plant, you can literally have the pollen transferred to the pistil, and now plant can now self-replicate, and that's one option. There's also something called cross-pollination, and that's where like the wind blows the pollen in the air from plant A to plant B, and that causes plant B to become pollinated. And that's why I sneeze and have watery eyes in the spring, because all of that pollen is being blown through the air. Insects are one of the best ways to carry pollen from one spot to another. As this bumblebee is trying to get the nectar out of this flower, its feet will probably touch and pick up some pollen, and then as it moves from flower to flower to flower, it will eventually pass over some of it. And like with humans, all it's going to take is one sperm and one egg to meet up to fertilize. Same thing with plants. All it takes is one part of pollen and the ovule to mix up together, and now you've got pollination occurring. Yeah. That's all it requires. It's just one with one, right? Yeah. Yeah. You can also have artificial pollination, by the way, where humans very specifically move the pollen from one plant to another one to make this happen. If you worked in a greenhouse, as an example, and you're trying to make plants pollinate during the early part of spring, like say right now, to get them ready to be sold, you might actually do some artificial pollination where a human would do this part. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll talk about that in tomorrow's lesson as well, where you can actually cross-pollinate and have like a white flower and a purple flower come together and make something pink. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. If it's okay though, that's actually tomorrow's topic. Tomorrow we're going to discuss how inheritance works and more about like how that works. Today is more about like the broad picture and then the vocabulary we use. So, okay. The next topic we want to discuss here is two different ways that cells can reproduce. One is called meiosis and one is called mitosis. Okay. Meiosis is all about these gamete cells. Okay. We just talked about how gamete cells are the ones used for sexual reproduction. Well, they're actually very different. They only contain half the chromosomes of a normal cell. How many chromosomes do most of the cells in your body have? 46. Right? However, the sexual reproduction cells that you have only have 23, which is really important because when 23 and 23 come back together, it makes 46. But there'd be a huge problem here. If 46 and 46 combined, you'd have, what is that going to make? 92. And then if 92 and 92 combined, you'd eventually get 180, and then you'd get 300. Do you see how over time, if 46 and 46 just kept adding to each other, we'd have so many chromosomes in our body, it would be crazy. So your body has a process to make it so that you only have half the chromosomes in your sexual cells. Okay? All of the cells in your body have 46 chromosomes, except your sperm or your eggs. Does that make sense? If you have sperm or if you have eggs, those only have 23, because when those cells, in theory, meet up with another partner, then it remakes 46 again. Okay? And the process through which this undergoes is something called meiosis. Meiosis is basically a cell division step in which you're able to produce multiple, we call them half cells sometimes. I'm going to write that here. We call them half cells. And hopefully it makes sense why they're half cells, because they have half as much DNA as normal. Right? You can't send all of your DNA to your offspring. You can send half of your DNA to your offspring, because the other half of their DNA better come from the person, the mate, right? Does that make sense? So here's the process through this works. In hang on, this one's meiosis. In mitosis first, what ends up happening is mitosis is where you basically replicate cells. So we're going to kind of skip the first step. This is cloning in step one. That's not what we care about. Let's do the second step. In meiosis, what happens is these chromosomes right here, see how it was red with blue and red with blue? Well, step one is they split. Blues go this way, reds go this way. They're not actually colored. You guys get that, right? This is just a visual representation, right? So, but half go one way, half go the other way, and the cell has now split in half. And then from there, this cell splits like this one splits like this splits like this splits like this. And now you get a whole bunch of cells, many cells, but all of these cells have much less DNA than when they started with. This would be normal this would be you having 46 chromosomes, and each of these is down to having 23. And I got more pictures to show that. Mitosis is not splitting in half and having half the DNA, but mitosis is about having identical cells. Okay? I just want you to look at the start and finish right here. Here's what you started with, and when you finished, see how there's two of them now? That's basically what I need you to know about mitosis. Mitosis clones yourself, but it's asexual reproduction. You are growing. Hopefully you guys know that, right? Like, you are growing. You have more skin, you have more blood. Well, when your body is growing itself like that, it's undergoing asexual reproduction, right? When you're growing, sorry that this sounds kind of crude, but you're not having sex to grow yourself. Does that make sense? Hopefully I can say that, right? Your body just naturally grows. We call that asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is when sex happens to cause someone to form, right? So, long story short is asexual reproduction is when you have one cell, here's one cell, and it made two. Well, 1 and 2, right? And then eventually, 2 cells makes 4, and 4 makes 8, and 8 makes 16. Okay? So when you're writing down the difference between meiosis and mitosis, if I can, do I have a summary slide here? I do. I think this is the best one to show here. Just look at start to finish. Here is mitosis. Mitosis started with this. And when we were done, now there's 2 of them. But do you see how the 2 of them are the exact same as each other? That's mitosis. Okay. It did not require sexual reproduction. You literally just grew. And it's a very complicated process. We don't actually talk about that in grade 9. That's a Bio 20 thing. You can look at the pictures if you'd like to get the basics. But like it replicates, it splits into 2 different pieces, but the 2 pieces are clones. Does that make sense? That's what's happening. You're growing new hair as we speak. The new hair cells that you are growing are happening asexually, and they're clones of each other. Meiosis is different. Meiosis takes one cell, and through a long, convoluted process, it makes a lot of smaller cells, but these are half cells. Can you see how there's 2 strands of DNA in this cell right here? And each of these cells right here only has 1 strand of DNA? Why can it only have half as much? Because those are the cells that are eventually going to combine to make a new person. Okay? So you better only have half the DNA. These are either sperm or egg. I'm not sure which one it is, but sperm or egg have half the DNA. And so your body does both processes, but in very different places. The only place your body will undergo meiosis is in the sexual organ cells. Right? So when you asked about sperm being created, that would be meiosis. Mitosis, though, is how you grow. Okay, we're about to wrap things up. How many more slides do I have left? I have those ones. Okay. So the last thing we want to do then is discuss, well, how does growth happen? And mitosis is one way that you can grow. Your cells will clone, basically. Well, here's some other ways that cells have the ability to reproduce, but not in a mommy and a daddy cells come together method, but just in a general growing manner. And most of these have to do with plants, not animals, right? As animals, we undergo meiosis, mitosis, but here's some other options. There's something called binary fission, and it's where a cell splits exactly in 2 after DNA replication. So it's kind of like mitosis, but it's usually done for one-celled organisms. Basically, it's cloning itself. There's something called budding, and we see this on plants a lot. A parent will make a small bud, which is a smaller version of itself. Eventually, the bud detaches and becomes a new individual. Plants kind of can do this a little bit here, where there's a new bud that forms exactly the same as the original. It then falls off like a seed, and then the seed eventually goes and travels somewhere else and then makes a new plant. Exactly the same as the original. Spores, I mean, these are all very similar. Spores are more about funguses and molds. Parent produces many spores, which are basically seeds, but they don't contain any new genes because they're just identical to the parents. And then there's also vegetative reproduction. You can actually take a plant, cut a section of a plant off, put it in a pot, water it, and you might be able to make a brand new plant out of it. It's called cutting, or it's known as vegetative reproduction. Right? I could go take some of those plants over there, maybe slice off a section of it, plant it in the ground, And if nurtured properly, I could actually make a brand new plant. Can you and I do that with our bodies? Can I cut off my arm? Then, well, okay, yes, I can do that. Can I cut off my arm, put my arm in an incubator somewhere and grow a new Chris? That would be cool, but that's not how that works. But it does for plants. There is one type of animal, though, that does have the ability to regrow a limb. Lizards can regrow their tails. Yeah. But if you cut the tail off of a lizard, that cut off tail doesn't make a new lizard, though. So, all right. Guys, I'm almost done. Can you give me like 3 more minutes here to wrap up our lesson, then we'll call it quits for the day? Here's our last thing we want to make sure we get then. Do you understand the difference between sexual and asexual reproduction? Sexual reproduction requires bringing together 2 gamete cells. It has to. It has to, right? Here's kind of a picture of sexual reproduction. I'm going to start right here. Here are 2 cells that were separate. Those 2 cells are then going to combine together and make a brand new person. And this new person has new characteristics, half from mom, half from dad. Eventually, you as a person will then make new half cells so that maybe one day you'll have kids. Okay, that's sexual reproduction. Asexual is very different. You start with a cell. It clones itself. The clone separates into pieces. It clones itself again. It separates into pieces, right? The big difference between sexual and asexual is that these are completely identical, and these ones are different. The new cells that you're making in your body as we speak for new skin cells, they're completely the same as the last ones. Okay? Now keep in mind, certain cells have been told to do certain things, right? Skin cells are told only be a skin cell, don't be a heart cell. That's why you don't have feet growing out of your torso, right? Remember that picture on the video I showed you there? But like all of your cells are identical. The new blood cell that you made is the exact same DNA as the new skin cell that you're making, is the same as the new hair cell that you're making. It's just within that cell, it's being told, don't do this. You're not supposed to do that. You go be a hair cell, don't be a heart cell. So asexual growth is always identical. But sexual reproduction, by its very nature, has to be different, yet similar. And we're going to talk about that a lot more tomorrow, similar. We're going to talk more tomorrow about, okay, well, how similar can you be to your parents? You're not identical to your parents, but are you relatively similar? Do you have the same hair color, eye color? You know, if you can roll your tongue, can your dad roll his tongue, kind of thing? In terms of some key words here, asexual reproduction, by the way, can be very dangerous because there is a lack of variation. We're going to talk about that also in the future as well. If there's no variation between species, there's a really good risk of species going extinct if conditions become unfavorable. Horrible thought experiment, but hypothetical situation. Imagine that coronavirus that's happening in China, say that it mutates, and it affects only people with blue eyes. And it becomes so dangerous that it's lethal if you have blue eyes. You know what? Although that sucks for me, because I have blue eyes, the human race would continue because not everybody has blue eyes. Does that make sense? But the human race would continue. That's because of sexual reproduction. But let's say that we only ever reproduced asexually, and we were all clones of each other. So if we were all exact clones of each other and we all had blue eyes, and this new virus mutates and kills everyone with blue eyes, do you see how there'll be a problem? So asexual reproduction is very dangerous because of the lack of variation. But there's a downside to sexual reproduction. If I didn't share this with you guys, actually me and my wife, well, not me, but my wife is pregnant. We're expecting our 4th kid in the summer. Thank you. But we don't get to have a new kid immediately. Right? How long does it take for a baby to grow in utero? 9 months, right? You all know this. Well, first of all, there requires a method for the gametes to unite, and the embryo needs protection and nurturing, and it takes time. Sexual reproduction is healthy because you get variety, but it doesn't just happen bang, bang. Right? Like it takes 9 months to grow a human. It takes like a year and a half for an elephant or a giraffe to be born, right? Now, fruit flies happen in like less than a day. Right? Yeah, that's true too. There's also another problem. There's a limit to how many offspring are possible. My wife cannot give birth to 100 children. That's just not feasible, right? There are some animals that often have a litter, like dogs could have 12 in a litter. Whereas asexual reproduction, you can have a lot of asexual reproduction happening quickly, right? Those plants that are growing right there, and especially when pollination happens in the spring, that can happen so fast because it's just cloning. You're not making something brand new, right? So this is kind of a nice summary slide that I've got right here that kind of shows the differences and advantages to asexual versus sexual. And now we're done, by the way. Asexual reproduction requires only one parent. Guys, you're your own parent because you're growing. That sounds really dumb, but like, you are growing. You are the parent to yourself, adding to you as you get grown. Now, you came from two parents, obviously, for your first cell. For one cell, you came through sexual reproduction. After that one cell was formed, now you're your own parent. In a way, right? The cells are identical. Now, granted, your cells turn on and off at a certain point. But if you're talking asexual reproduction, like say how some sort of plants grow, they're complete clones, sexual, different but similar. And then your DNA in asexual is 100% the same, but in sexual, in humans, it's 23 plus 23 adds up to give you 46. Whereas here, it's 46 just turns into 46. It's the same.
So in asexual reproduction, all of the cells are the same, would you get all the diseases they have and everything?
Yeah, you'd have the same sort of problem there, right? Now, what's good about us as humans, though, is that I'm kind of simplifying it, right? Although you have been undergoing asexual reproduction since basically 1 second after you were conceived, right? The good news is that your cells do have variety because you have heart cells and eye cells and stuff like that, right? But that code was conceived sexually, which is good because your code is different than mine, which is different than theirs, right? Right? So as a species here, if blue-eyed people all of a sudden are, color your eyes.
Green.
Perfect, okay. So if blue-eyed people all of a sudden fall prey to the new blue-eyed virus, you'd still live, right? But me, like all the cells that I make, all of my cells are coded for blue eyes. I can't all of a sudden change my eye color coding. I'm blue-eyed. I can't fix that. So. Whew, that was a lot. Is that interesting? Most kids usually find the genetics one kind of interesting because it kind of explains who you are and where you came from. So here's your challenge for your to complete thing. Okay. On the board here, I have two things I want you guys to work on. You can either do this right now. You might have been doing it as we went along. You can also do this tonight. You can do it tomorrow. I don't care. It's not for marks, but I do want you to do this. Okay. As always, stay with me for like 2 minutes, okay? There's a genetics reflection. I'd love for you to share with me what you now feel like you know about these topics. Do you think you understand how genes and alleles work? One more time. A gene, we all have genes for eyes. But I have alleles for blue eyes. You guys have alleles for whatever color eyes you have. Do you see how it's slightly different? Yes, there we go, perfect. Alleles give you the characteristics in the gene, right? Now, if you didn't have eyes, that would be different, right? But since we all have the gene for eyes, alleles give different characteristics. Tomorrow, we're going to talk more about dominant and recessive. But since one set comes from mom, one comes from dad, one of them wins. We're not really sure which one wins all the time. We'll talk about that more tomorrow, but that's what dominant does. If you have a dominant gene, a dominant allele, it takes over. Hopefully now you know all the technical terms. Fertilization, sperm, egg, zygote, all that stuff. And then, do you know what meiosis, mitosis are, and sexual and asexual? Because they kind of go together. Mitosis is asexual. It's where you just clone yourself and grow. Meiosis is the process to give your body the half cells, the sexual cells, sperm and egg, that can then undergo sexual reproduction. Okay, so work on that, and then here's one more thing to try, 5 multiple choice questions. We'll do them tomorrow, but I challenge you, try this yourself. Okay. So here's the page. I'm going to put a new YouTube video in from what I did today, and if you go down to the bottom for practice questions, we'll do maybe one as a group, and then I'll have you try the rest. In animals, the first cell of a growing organisms, which now contains genetic information from both parents. What do you call that? Let's talk about all of them again here. What was the gametes again? Yeah, the gametes are the 2 half cells. When the gametes come together, they make a zygote. that zygote then reproduces to become an embryo, and stamen was about plants, so that doesn't really fit. So if you click on, what was it, zygote, and submit, then it'll give you feedback, and it'll tell you, right? So that's my 2 things I want you to try, okay? Try the reflection and the practice questions for the lessons. Yeah. Oh, did I miss something here? What's the next one? Ah, right, okay. Can we do this one right here? We didn't discuss this one perfectly in class, but here's our second question. Let's try it. We discussed how humans are supposed to, can you guys just give me 1 more minute? Sorry, she asked a great question. Humans are supposed to have 46 chromosomes, supposed to. But there's an unfortunate disease or syndrome, Klinefelter, where you actually get 47 chromosomes. The question is, where would the defect for that be? Would it be during asexual, artificial selection? We didn't discuss that. Meiosis or mitosis? This is a bit of a thinking question. You said meiosis. You're right, it's meiosis. But do you think you can explain why it's meiosis? You're supposed to cause your cells to split from 46 to 23 and 23, right? But what if your cell accidentally splits from 46 into 22 and 24? And what happens if 24 adds to 23? You get 47, right? Now, once the first cell has 47, every subsequent cell has 47, right? So that's why it's not asexual or mitosis, because mitosis just clones what you have. It had to have been through the meiosis process, through which your body didn't make the right number of chromosomes to come together. Yeah, cool. Okay, I'm going to be done for the day. You guys feel free to start packing up if you like to. The bell's going any minute here. But that's your challenge for tomorrow. Do the reflection and the practice questions. All right, thanks everybody.